Hey, welcome to another week of the Joanna Whaley podcast, and welcome specifically to the Christmas episode of the show. A couple ways that you can be engaged with the show other than listening. If you're an LGBTQ person, or maybe you're a parent of a queer kid, or just an ally, you need some support, you can go to patreon.com/Joanna Whaley. For as little as $1 a month, you can get support from me and have direct message access. Also, if you're somebody who'd like to give this Christmas season, you can actually gift some memberships to Patreon. You can go to joannawhaley.com/donate. Today on the show, we're going to be talking all things Christmas, all things kind of deep dive into the Christmas story, but from a super queer perspective. I'm so happy you're here. Welcome to the show, friends. We're going to have a lot of fun today. We're going to move away from our Q&A format, and we're going to have a really fun show. On the other side of the music, here we go.
Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King, peace on earth.
Alrighty, friends, welcome to the show. If you're just joining us, my name is Joanna Whaley. I am a former evangelical megachurch pastor, and I'm a transgender woman. And yes, those two identities created a whole world of chaos in my world. As you can imagine, being a part of a very a Christian environment that was not affirming of the LGBTQ community made for a really challenging time, especially when I was in the closet. I was in the closet until I was 34 years old, and I became a pastor at the age of 17. And boy, does being a closeted trans woman in the evangelical church create a whole mess. And every year at Christmas time, for those watching live, welcome. So happy you're here. For those listening any other time, you can listen live on TikTok or Facebook. So you may hear me interacting with folks live on the show every once in a while. Today's going to be a little different. I've been going Q&A format, but I'm really just going to be sharing some thoughts about Christmas from a queer perspective today. As a former evangelical pastor and a trans woman, I remember every Christmas, honestly, even not, take the trans identity out of it, right? There's this really happy feeling around this time of year for a lot of people. There's a lot of, excitement. The decorations are fun and exciting. There's, green and red everywhere. We're just enjoying this time of year. And if you are someone who is a Christian, and yes, I am a trans woman, and I am someone who identifies as Christian. And so for me, this time of year, especially when I was an evangelical pastor, was just a wild time because it was always so busy. We were always busy making sure church happened. But this time of year was like kind of the Super Bowl of church, right? It's a Super Bowl of navigating the world, of everything we did in ministry. It was really busy, but there was all these expectations of like, this was going to be an awesome moment. We have to be a welcoming place. We have to be this super welcoming church or whatever. And I remember every Christmas Eve, there'd be like thousands and thousands of visitors into our church on Christmas Eve. And if you've ever been to a mega church, they're very like, kind of over the top sometimes with the like welcome, right? It's like you got someone at the door. We used to say from the streets to the seats, they have to feel like overly welcomed, right? That was the whole like kind of megachurch mantra. And it was really like big, huge painted on smiles everywhere you saw in church. This very like projection of joy happening all around. And really the idea was like, we want to project to the world that we've kind of like got it together, right? And that was a thing. I remember it was almost like every Sunday was like this. It was like, okay, we've got people coming in our doors. We have to have these really big smiles and like this super welcoming environment. And that was what was, expected when you came into church. And that's what it's like a lot. When you're a visitor in church, it's like this kind of, almost in a sense, like kind of strange welcome. And sometimes it can feel good, but other times it can feel like, wow, this is a little bit over the top. Like, is this how it really is around here? And you come to find out, like, some of those skepticisms that we had when you were visiting a church for the first time, like these kind of really big smiles, over the tops, like everyone's always so jolly when you come into the church. I would ask myself, and many people would ask themselves, what is behind this? What is the agenda behind this welcome? What is the agenda, especially around Christmas, right? Like, as a megachurch pastor, it would be like lights and smokes. Like, some churches literally had live animals on stage, right? And it was like over the top. And you wonder, like, all of this effort, all of this, like, kind of fake smiling that you see, especially from like worship leaders and pastors, like this really like these eyes wide open, like very, very intense joy that you're seeing projected at you from the pulpit to the room, to from the stage to the seats, even from the front door to those walking in, is like an over the top projection of joy. And I always ask myself sometimes, like, is that real? Is what I'm seeing real? And that's a question a lot of people ask themselves sometimes walking into church, especially if you were an LGBTQ person. If you are a queer person and you walk into a church and you see that overly intense smile, you see kind of this over-the-top welcome, when you know maybe this church is not really an affirming space, and this is really evident right now as many queer folks are getting ready to go to their family church. Maybe you're traveling and you're going into your family church this weekend for Christmas Eve service, and you know this church is not affirming, and you're married to someone of the same sex, or you're a trans person, right? And you're getting ready to go to this church. You're going to walk in there and people are going to be over the top. It's nice to see you. Oh my gosh. Hello. How are you? And you'll say, if you're a woman, you're like, this is my wife. And you're going to say that, and you're going to see this big smile. Welcome. We're so happy you're here. And this really begins to put up the flag, especially for queer folks, to say, what's behind this? What's going on behind this? Is there an agenda behind this? And for those of us in the LGBTQ community, church, especially this time of year, with that kind of over-the-top joy, can be a red flag for us. But it's like this juxtaposed thing where you see all this joy, but you also know there's some kind of agenda going on in the background. And if you're trying to say, no, we're just being joyful, we're just really happy to see you there. Remember, I was an evangelical pastor for 20 years. I was in the meeting. I was in the meeting that says we have to be the most welcoming, biggest welcome space, so that God will change them, so that we can get them in the doors and they'll turn from their sin. And especially if you're a queer person, people think if we welcome them and their wife, eventually God will break them up, or, will cause their sin to dissipate, right? These are the things we heard. These are the things we hear in the queer community. But that's because I sat in the meetings as a pastor and said, that's what we wanted. It was going to be over the top. So we have that going on in church, right? We have that going on in the Christian space where you see that over the top welcome and you have a little bit of suspicion about what you are seeing, right? But at the same time, this Christmas, with all the joy, we're seeing that same skepticism and that same kind of, polar opposite thing happening in the same time. We're seeing these parallels running in our world today. What we're seeing right now is running parallel to this joyful Christian message of Christmas. This joy, everyone's singing joy to the world, right? Everyone's so excited about Christmas this year. But running parallel to that is this year, especially in the wake of an election, we are seeing the modern narrative that wants to eradicate trans people and queer folks from modern society. These are the things that are going on in our world right now. So we are battling with these parallel ideas in our life as trans people. So, what do we do with this? How can we look at what's going on in our world and think we're safe? How can we sit in and enjoy the Christmas season if we are fearful of what our government is wanting to do to those of us in the trans community? What do we do with this Christmas season when we have a Christian church who wants to eradicate us from society? What do we do when we have to go to the Christian church of our family, of our youth, with our partner, with our spouse, as ourselves? How do we navigate the smiles and the over-the-top joy when we have to understand that underneath there is a parallel agenda that doesn't want us to exist? For those watching live today, many people are trying to chime in, which is hilarious because I've had like open Q&A for the last 4 weeks and no one's called in. But now that I'm not doing live calls today, everyone wants to call in. Welcome, friends. If you listen to the show live, if you stay after the recording, I'll be happy to take your questions and chat with you. Max says, I'm confused with my sexuality and I battle depression every day because of it. Max, I'm really sorry you experienced that. And you know, the hard part is that we battle with depression because there's this projection in our world that we can't be ourselves and we can't explore our sexual identity or our gender identity. We've been told, and we have everybody smiling at us on one side, on the welcome end of the churches, of these religious institutions telling us, welcome, come as you are, but don't you dare explore who you are. Don't you dare. And that is such a challenge that we have to deal with. And Max, I'm so sorry that you deal with that. I dealt with this tension forever. I remember the first time I talked about my gender and my struggle with my gender. I had worked for a church for years, and I thought I was safe. I thought I was safe to share my gender struggle with my pastors. And once I was honest, I realized there was a very different story and expectation of who I should be and how I should present to the world. Right now, there are so many people getting ready to go to the family church, go to their grandma's service because their grandma wants them to go, or their parents want them to go, or it's just the tradition the family has done. And they're going to get ready. They're going to walk into the church, and they're going to hear pastors who represent what is supposed to be an unconditional love rail against people who are seeking just that. Apparently, I forgot to turn off my alarms today before the show started. So apologies to my live audience. Apparently, I didn't turn my alarms off. I'm working the midnight shift tonight at the hospital that I work at, and I was supposed to be sleeping right now, but I can't sleep. So, anyways, I have a lot more I'm going to say about this. On the other side of our commercial break here, I'm going to dive into a lot of things on this topic. On the topic of history and how we navigate this whole time and how we can find comfort, yes, even in the story of Christmas and the story of Jesus as queer people in this time. On the other side of the commercial, we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere, and we'll carry this conversation on.
Late in time, behold him come, offspring of the virgin's womb.
Hey, podcast listeners. If you are an LGBTQ person or an ally, or maybe you're a parent of a queer kid and you just need support, you can go to patreon.com/Joanna Whaley for as little as $1 a month. We can have direct message access, and at other higher tiers, we can also have Zoom calls. I know that this experience of being LGBTQ and trying to pursue your spirituality is a huge, huge issue for many people, and there needs to be affordable ways. We also have people who sponsor people who maybe it's unsafe for them to make payments. You can go to joannawhaley.com/support and inquire about that, and if there is enough sponsorships, we can have support for you. Go to joannawhaley.com/support. All right, friends, welcome back to the show. Before the break, I was just kind of talking about some of the struggles we have in the LGBTQ community, especially around Christmas time, all the joy, all the church services that kind of, seem over the top happy and joyful, but we know there's some kind of agenda in the background. Believe it or not, Christmas can actually speak to the queer community, can speak to the trans community. Each and every year, I used to read the Christmas story. Again, if you're just joining me live, I am a transgender woman. I'm also somebody who identifies as a Christian, as a progressive Christian. And there's this passage in Matthew 2 where, I'm just going to read it, Matthew 2:16-18. It says, "Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and he snuffed out the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years and under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men." We've been looking at this story of Christmas for years and years and years. And I think sometimes we like to skip right to the part where Jesus is born, yay! And we forget that before Jesus comes into the story, there's actually a passage of this guy named Herod trying to end the lives of every boy 2 years and under. In fact, I will submit to you that the idea of gendercide existed in the Bible. And I will submit to you that this is actually happening today, right now. It is. So here's what I'm going to say. The first thing I want you to hear today is, one, gendercide is a biblical thing, but it isn't godly. Gendercide is happening. Gendercide, if you want to say, hey, live a biblical life, like those who oppose us are actually living according to what the Bible taught us about oppressing people and trying to snuff out people of a certain gender, right? Gendercide is a biblical thing, but it's not on the right side of history. If you're wondering, what is this term I'm saying? Gendercide? What is that? Gendercide is the systemic, ending of life of a specific gender group. Mary Warren in 1985 was kind of the one who penned this term, gendercide. It actually dates all the way back. I mean, it dates back generation after generation, but some of the earliest recordings of this, especially when it comes to queer folks and trans folks, would be back to the 1513 era, when the Spanish conquistadors were found third gender people and were like, no, you don't live up to our religious idea. We need to get rid of you. So this was happening back in the 1500s, this idea, and it dates all the way back to Bible times. And the idea here is that Herod this character in the Bible, right? The person in power was threatened by someone. This person's power was threatened by Jesus. This person's power was threatened by a single person, right? So what did Herod do? He decided, you know what? I'm just going to get rid of this whole gender and age. Because I don't know what to do with this one person who threatens my power. I'm just going to go after them, the whole gender and the whole age group. Gendercide was happening in the Bible. And it's happening today. The second thing I'm going to tell you today is, people in power may not like you, but you're still a child. People in power in our country, they may not like who you are. They may not like your gender expression. They may not like who you love or who loves you. They may not love that you fly a rainbow flag, but you need to understand that you're still a child. Yes, and I'm speaking from a Christian framework. So if you're from a different religion or you don't hold religion, just try to hear through my religious words right now, right? I'm of the belief that you're a child of God, right? That's the theology I hold personally, right? So no matter who you are, who you love, who loves you, you're still a child of God. And even though power doesn't like you, even though people in our government in the United States don't like you as a trans person, it doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change that you are a child. It really doesn't change that. Please hold that today. There's this Greek word, huios, okay? It's the primary word of a son. And what's important to understand is in the Bible, right? In this idea where we get you are a child of God, you're a son of God, very gendered language, right? But the idea is this was a widely used term, but it really taught the idea that we are akin to God. We are kin to the divine. This is the word that in the ancient Greek that they were using. When you're a child, there's nothing you can do to relinquish that reality, right? I'm a parent, I'm a child of a parent. There's nothing that I can do. There's nowhere I can run that would stop that love, that would stop that identifier. Now, unless you're Macaulay Culkin, with Home Alone, and you go and get an annulment, right? But the reality still exists. You're they're your parents. They're your biological parents, right? You can legally change it, but they're still your biological parents. But this huios, right? This word meaning a son or a child, this was a widely used term, and to use it to pair us, human beings, with the divine was a wild thing to do. So for you and me, for me as a trans person, you need to understand, no matter what you think of trans people, no matter what political party you align with, no matter what theology or whatever your pastor says, I don't care what you say, what the government says about me as a trans person, I will always be a child of God. And there's nothing that anyone in power can do to stop that. There is no pastor's sermon at Christmas. There is no pastor's sermon on a Sunday that can change my standing, yes, as a trans woman, as a child of God. Or you, as a queer person. There is nothing you can do. There is nothing that anyone can say that changes that. The third thing I want you to see is to see the queer example. This is going to be a tough statement for many of my evangelical friends to hear. See the queer example we have in the baby Jesus. Yes, you heard me say that. See the queer example that we see and find in the baby Jesus. In that story of Matthew 2, right? In verse 16, it said, like, Herod went after all the children who were 2 years and under. What I want to draw out of this is some queer theology for you, is this can show us as queer folks, as gay people, as lesbians, as trans folks, is that you cannot control the things that others hate. You cannot control the identifier that threatens power. Jesus had, look, you want to look, incarnate Jesus, like came down from the heavens, whatever your theology is there. Jesus came down, right? And he couldn't control who he was. He couldn't control his age. He was 2 years old or under. He was in that age group, right? Just like trans people, just like gay people. Despite what people say is that you cannot choose to be gay. You cannot choose to not be gay. You cannot choose to not be trans. You cannot choose these things. We can see here that power was threatened by this one person, so they targeted the whole of that gender and age. Right now, in our world, power is threatened by trans people and queer folks. Power is afraid of us for some reason. So what does power do? Look at the example of Jesus and see how queer this is. Power goes after everyone who even resembles the people that threaten power. This word, I don't speak very good Greek, so forgive me. Anahero, okay, terrible pronunciation. It's this idea is to destroy, to put to death, to slay, to take away, to get rid of. This is the word that we find in the ancient Greek, and that is what's happening today. Right now, especially in the United States, but in countries all over the world, people in power are threatened by the minority of queer people. Trans people, lead the headlines on Fox News. Trans people lead the headlines in church services. It is one of the biggest topics of conversation within religious groups, is this trans identity, right? Is trans people, and how the media is trying to turn your kids trans. But what I'm going to submit to you, it's because trans people threaten the power of heteronormativity, and it threatens churches' giving. I talk to pastors all the time who want to affirm the LGBTQ community, who want to affirm the trans community. But if they do, it is a threat. So they get louder against our community. How can you say that, Joanna? Because I was that pastor. I was that person. I spoke so loudly against the queer community because I was so afraid of losing everything. This is what's happening in our world today. So this Christmas, remember Jesus challenging power by simply being himself. Have a very queer Christmas this year, when you can see the story of queerness in Jesus. Friends, thank you for joining the podcast today. I hope you have an amazing Christmas.